We have breaking news tonight from California and 15 other states that have filed a federal lawsuit to block what they call President Trump's illegal and unconstitutional attempt to start building a wall on the southern border using a presidential emergency declaration. The first sentence of the lawsuit filed in federal court in California by the Attorney General of California and 15 other state attorneys general says that the 16 states, quote, bring this action to protect their residents, natural resources, and economic interests from President Donald J. Trump's flagrant disregard of fundamental separation of powers principles ingrained in the United States Constitution. As predicted by many legal scholars, the president's own words appear in this lawsuit being used against him by the 16 attorneys general. The lawsuit quotes the president saying this on Friday.
I could do the wall over a longer period of time. I didn't need to do this, but I'd rather do it much faster.
The lawsuit also quotes the president saying that the Congress has already appropriated, quote, so much money we don't know what to do with it.
We have so much money we don't know what to do with it. I don't know what to do with all the money they're giving us. It's crazy.
It is crazy. The lawsuit quotes the president's appointed heads of the administration's intelligence agencies, saying there is no national security threat at the southern border, as they did in their testimony in the Senate on January 29th. The lawsuit cites damages that the states will suffer if the president is allowed to divert money appropriated by Congress for the Defense Department to then be used for the construction of a wall on the southern border. And the constitutional linchpin of the lawsuit is Article 1, Section 9 of the Constitution of the United States, which is quoted in the lawsuit saying, no money shall be drawn from the Treasury, but in consequence of appropriations made by law. In the budget law that the Congress just passed, it specifically refused to put into that law the appropriation that the president asked for to build his wall. Most Republicans have avoided voicing support for the president's emergency declaration after he announced it on Friday. But one Republican senator who is up for re-election in 2020 is now contradicting his own past statements about Donald Trump and about presidents abusing the federal budget process. In 2016, during the presidential campaign, Republican Senator Lindsey Graham said, if we nominate Trump, we will get destroyed and we will deserve it. Yesterday, the man who predicted his own deserved destruction said he is happy now to watch Donald Trump take money away from school kids to pay for his wall.
There's about $3.6 billion of it that could come from military construction efforts, including construction of a middle school in Kentucky, housing for military families, improvements for bases like Camp Pendleton and Hanscom Air Force Base. Aren't you concerned that some of these projects that were part of legislation that you helped approve in Congress are now going to possibly be cut out?
Well, the president will have to make a decision where to get the money. Let's just say for a moment that he took some money out of the military construction budget. I would say it's better for the middle school kids in Kentucky to have a secure border. We'll get them the school they need, but right now we got a national emergency on our hands. So unfortunately, he's got to do it on his own, and I support his decision to go that route.
We are joined now by the leading newsmaker of the night, California Attorney General Xavier Becerra. Attorney General Becerra, thank you very much for joining us tonight. I really appreciate you reaching us by phone to talk about this lawsuit. How long did it take you to assemble the particulars of this lawsuit from the time the president announced it? Were you working on the lawsuit before the president made his announcement?
Lawrence, thanks for having me. And absolutely, we started preparing this lawsuit last year, knowing that the president was signaling that he might try to do something like this. And so we've been preparing. We've been working with our sister states, and there, as you mentioned, 15 other states. I believe there'll actually be more who ultimately are part of litigation. We've been working this because no one wants to watch our taxpayer dollars be misspent. And so we are, as you just mentioned, now in court.
You have 129 million Americans who are represented by the attorneys general already in this lawsuit, and you say there might be more states joining it. Is that because those states are, in effect, taking their time, or they need more time to study the particulars of this?
That's correct, Lawrence. Some states are looking a little closer at this and how it impacts their particular state. Other states might be preparing to file separately or with others. And so I think before this is done, you will see several other states who enter the fray.
Now, General, you brought this case in federal court in San Francisco. That means that on appeal, it will be heard by the Ninth Circuit and then presumably would go on to the Supreme Court. That's actually the route that Donald Trump predicted on Friday. Let's listen to what the president predicted the legal process would be. Let's listen to this.
We will have a national emergency, and we will then be sued, and they will sue us in the Ninth Circuit, even though it shouldn't be there. And we will possibly get a bad ruling, and then we'll get another bad ruling, and then we'll end up in the Supreme Court, and hopefully we'll get a fair shake, and we'll win in the Supreme Court.
Attorney General Becerra, what's your reaction to that?
Well, I'm glad the president understands the course that this will take, except for the last part where I think you're going to find that conservative justices along with liberal justices are going to want to protect the Constitution, not protect Donald Trump from his abuses of the Constitution. So we're feeling pretty good that we've got a strong case. Separation of powers has been around for a long time. A first-year law student could argue this case for us, and so we're just preparing for it.
I noticed that in the line item veto case in the late 1990s, Clarence Thomas actually voted with the majority saying that a line item veto for the president is unconstitutional, citing the same clause of the Constitution that you cite in your complaint, which says that really the Congress has complete control, utter and complete control over all spending, and the president's only option with legislation is to sign the legislation or to veto the legislation. There is no other option. And this case strikes me as a cousin of that, which would presumably have Clarence Thomas's support on your side, just as he, to be consistent with what he was ruling on the line item veto.
Well, Lawrence, it's a good example that you raised, because that was a case where there was actually a law that was passed by Congress to give the president line item veto power. So you actually had Congress passing a measure that would give the president this power. And still the Supreme Court said, no, you can't do that because the Constitution doesn't give the president that authority. That's the power of the purse is vested only in Congress. And so in this case, where Donald Trump has no measure that he can point to that Congress has passed to give him that ability to redirect, to divert dollars, it's an even clearer case. And his fabricated claim of a crisis at the border, a national emergency, is, as he himself admitted, something he didn't need to do. And so for a guy who declares a national emergency on Friday and on Saturday, less than 24 hours later, he's already down in Florida at his resort, I'm not sure how well it's going to play that this is a national emergency in his eyes as he's vacationing down in Florida.
And as you mentioned, the line item veto was passed by Congress. And I can remember on the floor of the Senate at the time, the senators who opposed it said that this is unconstitutional and the Supreme Court is going to find it unconstitutional. And they weren't even that worried about it, actually, when it passed the Senate. They were so confident it was going to be found unconstitutional. And I have to say, they sounded then a lot like you sound now.
Well, and my concern is that we're not hearing enough voices of bipartisan members of Congress and the senators saying that it's important to protect the constitutional prerogatives that each branch of government has. And it's becoming a case where the party of Lincoln, the proud party of Lincoln, and today we celebrated President's Day, is perilously close to becoming hook, line, and sinker the party of Trump. And it appears, unfortunately, that too many Republicans may be complicit in Donald Trump's efforts to actually circumvent the Constitution. But as I said, if Congress can't get a measure passed that would halt what he's trying to do, then that's why we're in court, and we'll, I hope, work with an institution that my belief is still strong in it, will stand up for what 240 years of democracy has made very clear. There is a separation of powers in this country.
The newsmaker of the night, California Attorney General Xavier Becerra, thank you very much for joining us tonight. We really appreciate you taking the time. And Claire McCaskill served in the United States Senate and watched Senator Lindsey Graham grow from Trump attacker to now the most fervent Trump supporter in the United States Senate. Earlier this month on Morning Joe, former Senator McCaskill said, quote, "Lindsey Graham has lost his mind, but it could just be Lindsey Graham is running for re-election." Last year, Lindsey Graham was surely terrified by a South Carolina poll that showed him with only a 51% approval rating among Republicans in his state. That's the kind of number that could invite a Republican primary challenge from an avid Trump supporter. But then Lindsey Graham decided to become that avid Trump supporter. And now his approval rating among Republicans in South Carolina is 72%. And so Lindsey Graham is now a lot less likely to face a primary challenge in his reelection campaign in South Carolina next year. And Lindsey Graham is the most emphatic supporter of President Trump's emergency declaration to build his wall. Joining our discussion now is former Senator Claire McCaskill and former Senate staffer Adam Gentleson, whose op-ed piece in the New York Times says that Mitch McConnell has surrendered the Republican Senate to Donald Trump. Senator McCaskill, do you want to, I want to offer you an opportunity to revise and extend your remarks about Senator Graham, as they say in the Senate. Is he crazy or is he running for re-election, and what's the difference?
Well, you know, the old Lindsey was brave and courageous. And, you know, he took some positions that maybe should have disqualified him in his last election as a Republican in South Carolina. But that didn't seem to bother him in those days, when he was willing to try to find common ground, when he was willing to speak truth to power when the occasion called for it, when he was willing to stand up to an overreach of executive power, particularly when it was going after his beloved military. So this is, you know, and really the thing that really is bizarre about this is if Lindsey Graham believed this was an emergency, if any of my former colleagues believed this was an emergency, I was in the Senate the last 2 years under President Donald Trump. I never heard any of them give an impassioned plea on the floor of the Senate about this emergency. I never saw Mitch McConnell, you know, putting the hammer on everyone to appropriate more money for the president's wall. I never saw any of that until the Democrats took the House. And now it is a manufactured emergency for political purposes for the president. And obviously, Lindsey Graham has hopped on that train.
Senator, you're a lawyer, a former prosecutor. What's your legal view of this lawsuit filed tonight by the state of California and 15 other states?
Well, ironically, I think it could be a 5-4 decision, with the Democrats being the ones that are considered more liberal on the court being the ones dissenting, because this is a case made for a constitutional conservative. It's a gut check moment for the Senate. And for all my friends who have waved those constitutions around in my face, in the face of voters for years, people who run as constitutional conservatives, this is a gut check moment for anyone who is proud of the checks and balances in the Constitution. Our democracy is very simple. If there's not enough votes in Congress to appropriate money, the president has to deal with it. He doesn't get to go find the money. That's not what our Constitution says. So I think this lawsuit will be successful, and I think this motion of disapproval that the Senate's going to have to vote on in a few weeks, or maybe even sooner, that's going to be a moment where many senators are going to be worrying about history and how history will talk about them and how much they're willing to protect the institution of Congress as it relates to this grand and glorious democracy that served us so well all these years.
Let's listen to the president's top advisor on immigration and border issues, Stephen Miller, yesterday on Fox News, who apparently has not been able to find any precedent, even no matter how hard he tried, for what the president has done here.
Can you name one case where a president has asked Congress for money, Congress has refused, and the president has then invoked national powers to get the money anyway?
Well, this current situation...
Just yes or no, sir?
The current situation pertains specifically to the Military Construction Authority.
I'm just asking, has there been a single case where Congress asked for money for military construction, Congress said no, and he then...
The meaning of the statute, Chris, is clear on its own terms. If you don't like the statute, or members of Congress don't like the statute...
Would you agree the answer is no? There hasn't been a single case like this.
Adam Jellison, it doesn't seem like they did a lot of homework on this.
No, I mean, look, if the president could just go get some other money when Congress didn't give him the money that he wanted, this would happen all the time. But as you laid out in your opening, there's this one minor inconvenience called Article 1, Section 9 that says Congress controls the power of the purse. So there's a reason this doesn't happen. And President Trump can't just ignore that and try to grab the money himself because Congress didn't appropriate it.
Adam, you worked in the United States Senate with Lindsey Graham there. Do you have a theory about how he went from Trump attacker to now the most rabid Trump supporter in the Senate, the one who's willing, as he just said on video, to take money away from school kids on military bases in order to pay for the Trump wall?
I think only Senator Graham can know for sure why he's doing what he's doing, but it seems very clear that he's lost his moral compass. I mean, Senator McCaskill alluded to this, but I remember him working with Democrats on the immigration bill in 2013 and being a man of principle. It wasn't that long ago, but that seems to have changed, and you can't find a more rabid obedient Trump supporter than Senator Graham right now, and it's really sad to watch.
Senator McCaskill, I noticed that there were no other Republican senators who were eager or as eager as Lindsey Graham to get out there and talk about this. I saw some on television trying to swerve away from it as much as they can. Mitch McConnell said that he supported the idea before the Senate cast their vote on the bill that kept the government open. It seemed like Senator McConnell was saying that on the Senate floor just to make sure he'd get all those Republican votes. McConnell's not out there defending this thing.
No, in fact, I think McConnell was trapped. I think in order to secure the assurance from the president that he would sign the bill that would keep the government open, I think McConnell had to tell him that he would go to the floor and say he'd support this fake emergency because he knew the damage that shutting down the government was going to do to the Republican senators that are up for election in 2020. Mitch McConnell is focused on how best to protect those Republican senators. Now he knows he's got this really difficult situation where they're all going to have to vote. Now, I've noticed a number of them have said they won't vote for it. Lamar Alexander has spoken out. And don't underestimate how much respect Lamar Alexander has in the Republican caucus. That's a big no vote. You've obviously got the more moderate senators who have spoken out. You've got some of the more conservative senators who have indicated they're troubled by this. So what's really going to be interesting to see here, these guys all know that this is wrong. They all know it. They all know this is not the way this is supposed to work, that when you can't get the votes for an appropriation, you declare a phony a national emergency. They all know it. So it will be really interesting to see, especially those that are in tough states, if they stick with Trump because they're afraid of the politics of Trump supporters, or whether they vote against Trump because they're worried about independent voters in their states that are going to look down their nose at this kind of shenanigan.
Former Senator Claire McCaskill and former Senate staffer Adam Jellison, thank you both for joining us with your insight tonight. Really appreciate it. Thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on the button below for more from The Last Word and the rest of MSNBC.